Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Benjamin Britten's Peter Grimes, which was shown at the Theater an der Wien. The conductor was Cornelius Meister. The production was done by Christoph Loy. The set design was done by Johannes Layaker. The costumes were done by Judith Weihrauch. The choreographer was Thomas Wilhelm, and the lights were done by Bernd Purkabreck. Now, I have heard a lot about this opera and how this was also one of Benjamin Britten's most well-known works, totally up there with the likes of Billy Budd, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Rape of Lucretia, Albert Herring, Curlew Road, and The Turn of the Screw. Now, I have been noticing certain patterns when it came to Britten's operas which starred male protagonists. It usually involved them facing society, trying to fight against the norms of society, trying to fight against all the taboos thrown at them, and trying to see them survive very harsh environments. And with Billy Budd, the one that I saw back at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, this basically talked about life on deck and how difficult it can be for a carefree young spirit like Billy Budd to really give in to the demands of the authorities and even try to make sure that he survives well. With Peter Grimes, well, this is pretty much an opera that shows a pretty dark subject, which involves Peter's sort of relationship with his young apprentice John, and how every townspeople perceive him as a criminal, as a wrongdoer, except his very great friend Ellen Orford, who is a school teacher. Now, what really makes this opera stand out in its own special way is not just because of the main hero, Peter Grimes, who is pretty much the anti-hero of this opera, but also the main heroine of this opera, Ellen Orford. Now, Ellen Orford is also another catalyst which keeps this opera moving along in terms of its plot. And she's also the one who tries to see the good in Peter, and she really wants to make sure that he is safe from harm's way, and not to mention, as a school teacher, she knows what is best for her children, and she knows what's best for the future of everyone around her. So when you think about it, the story of this opera is quite interesting, and this was also based on the 1810 novel by George Crabbe known as The Burrow. I haven't read the book, but for those of you who have read it, I'd like to hear your thoughts about it. Did you like it? Did you find this very interesting? Have you ever heard about this book before you ever heard about this opera in particular? Please let me know. And it's very safe to say that Peter Grimes was also an establishing opera for Benjamin Britten to really show the harshness of society against men of certain beliefs and all those type of things. There is a definite pattern with not just Peter Grimes, but also the likes of Albert Herring and Billy Budd. And I really feel like these three operas in particular could almost be like spiritual brothers or cousins, so to say. With that said, let's get on to what I thought about the production, the singers, and the conducting and chorus. The production, well, in traditional productions of Billy Budd, they're usually taken in the harbors of England, those coastal areas, and all those type of things. Well, this particular production, when I saw pictures of this production, I thought it looked rather interesting. It almost looked as though that it came out of a fairy tale, and it seemed rather innovative. And even before the opera started, we see a bed like almost close to the footlights of the stage. And there's Peter Grimes sleeping on there. And once the opera starts, he is then rudely awakened by the presence of everyone involved in the opera, from Auntie to Mrs. Sedley to Bulstrode to Hobson to the lawyer Swallow, and even to the two nieces, and even Ellen Orford. I actually found this production rather interesting, quite intricate in its own special way, and not to mention the costumes were quite great. I especially was quite interested with Ellen Orford's costume because usually in traditional productions of Peter Grimes, Ellen Orford would usually be dressed in her Sunday's best, like what every other schoolmarm would be dressed as, or what every other school teacher would be dressed at, with a hair on a bun, and usually very presentable clothing, with a long skirt, black boots, and bloomers underneath, and a white blouse. Usually we'd come to expect that as a typical costume for a typical British school teacher. But in this production, she wears men's clothing, as if to suggest that Ellen, as opposed to, let's say, Auntie or Mrs. Sadley or the two nieces or almost every other woman in the production, she has been through a man's world. She has known what it's like. She has strived through it all. And she's worked her ass off entirely to keep herself alive. Not to mention what I do notice about this production, considering that this was done by Christophe Loy, is that there are a lot of overtones to be found, a lot of homosexual overtones, especially considering the relationship between Bulstrode and Peter Grimes, and even that of Peter Grimes and John the Apprentice, and even that of Bulstrode and John the Apprentice. Now, what I also notice is that in traditional Peter Grimes productions, John the Apprentice is usually a boy of, let's say, 5 to about 15 years old, or even like 10 years old. In this production, he's a man in his early 20s. Quite unusual when you think about it, but I think what Christophe Loy was trying to tell in this production is that, well, this John in particular has grown up in a society where everything is harsh, nothing is safe, and everything around him just turns to crap. So basically, he's gotten used to this, yet at this point, he just feels so numb that he doesn't really mind the fact that he is having a little bit of a fling with Bulstrode and Peter Grimes, even though his fling with Peter Grimes is pretty much one of the strongest, yet at times most intimate, yet almost to the point where it can be kind of scary and disturbing. Because, well, even though John is kind of numb to the world around him, Peter has known what it's like in this world, but has completely almost lost his senses. So the production was very interesting. There were a lot of concepts being used with it that seemed to draw in certain viewers, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And an audience member who was standing next to me also stated that Auntie looked a lot more Viennese than British, because usually in a lot of traditional British productions, Auntie is usually presented as a little bit more grotesque, maybe a little bit more husky, and maybe even has like pale blonde or even black or even gray hair. With this Auntie in particular, her costume is a lot more elegant. She has red hair, and she's just elegant all around. But still, the production and costumes were very interesting, and as to be expected in a Christophe Loy production, I thought they really played into the psyche of the characters quite well. And now we get to the part that I'm most excited to talk about, the singers. And let's start off with our titular anti-hero, Peter Grimes, sung by a singer I've been admiring for quite some time, and one who has found himself singing a lot of great lyrical roles, and here he is singing this tour de force of a Britten tenor role. I'm of course referring to Joseph Kaiser. Now, Joseph Kaiser is a tenor I've been quite familiar with for quite some time. He sang Narabot in a production of Richard Strauss's Salome at the Royal Opera House. He sang the role of Tamino in a film version of Kenneth Branagh's vision of Mozart's Magic Flute, and he was basically very well known in a lot of lyric tenor roles. So I've been following his career for some time, and let me just say something about the role of Peter Grimes. Now, the thing about Peter Grimes is that it's a very, very challenging sing for any tenor, whether he be a full lyric, a spinto, or a dramatic tenor, or even, hell, Wagnerian tenor. He's attracted a lot of magnificent tenors of the past. Most likely, the ones that come to my mind are Peter Pears and John Vickers. They have found a lot of success with this role. They've made this role in particular as their own and have sung in a lot of international opera houses, marking their names in this particular anti-hero. With Joseph Kaiser as the titular anti-hero, I thought he was just totally in his element. He really played the character well. He definitely made us feel a lot of empathy, a lot of sympathy, sorrow, pain, and just the suffering he has to go through. And when he loses his mind, we can't help but say, poor thing. He's been through hell and back. He's been through a lot of hell in his life, especially of what society has to give him. He's just that fascinating and enthralling with his performance of this anti-hero. And his voice was excellent. It's top-tier singing all around, all evening long. He had a very fine, magnificent voice, and it's quite surprising that he started singing roles like Tamino and then graduated to roles like Narobot, and here he is singing Peter Grimes. And he did excellently. Singing the role of Ellen Orford is yet another singer I really, really admire, and one I definitely enjoy watching on the stage. And it's Agneta Eichenholz. Now, the thing about Ellen Orford is that she has attracted a lot of full lyric, spinto, and dramatic sopranos. She is quite a very fascinating character, and a lot of sopranos have found a great amount of success singing her. With Agneta Eichenholz as Ellen Orford, she sang her role magnificently, giving such a very well-rounded, lyrical, and just an awesome portrayal of this sympathetic heroine. Singing the role of Auntie was the veteran German contralto Hannah Schwarz. The thing about Auntie is that just like Clytemnestra, Erda, Ulrika, Maddalena from Rigoletto, Mistress Quickly, La Checa, the Cabanica, Grandmother Boria, Yetzbaba, and many, many other roles requires a dramatic contralto with great low notes, you really need someone very formidable who can sing this very thankless part. There has been no shortage of contraltos specializing in this delightfully, witch of a role. With Hannah Schwarz as Auntie, she does a very wonderful job in this role, singing with such gorgeous tones, and it's rather surprising that she's currently in her 70s and she still has a very fine voice. She has kept her longevity to the absolute peak, and she sang her role magnificently with such aplomb and such vivacity and with such a charismatic yet arresting stage presence which put me on the edge of my seat. Singing the role of Mrs. Sedley is the very wonderful British soprano turned mezzo-soprano Rosalind Plowright. The thing about Mrs. Sedley is that, of course, she also does need a contralto, given the fact that she also has some very deep lines as well. but she also does need a dramatic mezzo-soprano who has sung the likes of Fricka, Brangena, Azucena, and at times the roles of Ulrika, Herodias, the nurse from Frau ohne Schatten, and even the Countess Geschwitz from Lulu. With Rosalind Plowright, what more can I say about this woman? She is a very consummate actress and an equally fine musician. She started out as a spinto/dramatic soprano, but somewhere along the line in the late 90s, or even the mid-90s, her voice developed a certain darkness to it, and a certain roundness and richness, and began singing the more mezzo-soprano parts and even the more contralto parts, like Amneris and Clytemnestra, Herodias, and nowadays the likes of Madame de Coissy, Madelon, and the Contessa di Coigny. And here she was as this total bitch of a character, Mrs. Sedley. Now, Mrs. Sedley is such an ungrateful thing because, well, when you come right down to it, Mrs. Sedley's character is pretty much a drug addict. She's a junkie, and she's a very thankless thing for a lot of contraltos and mezzos. And boy, did Madame Plowright pull her off with such a burnished tone and a very involving stage presence. And she was just absolutely fabulous from beginning to end. Singing the role of Captain Bulstrode was the British dramatic baritone Andrew Foster Williams. The thing about Captain Bulstrode is that he needs a strong dramatic baritone. With Andrew Foster Williams, he was absolutely excellent. Of course, he did start off with a bit of tremolo, which didn't really sound that great, though it still maintained that power, but he got a lot better throughout the evening. He was totally in his element as an actor. He was totally believable in his chemistry with Joseph Kaiser's Peter Grimes, and I've noticed a lot of belligerent tension between these two characters, and I really have to applaud these two fine singers for really bringing out the best of their characters. Singing the role of Hobson was Lucas Jakobski. Now, the thing about Hobson is that even though he is a very thankless character to sing, he has attracted a great amount of basso cantantes and at times basso profondos. Lucas Jakobski does a very wonderful job bringing in a lot of swagger, a lot of virility, a lot of that tough guy exterior, and just bringing in a lot of toughness and manliness to this role. He is just such a charmer in his own special way, especially with this character. I pretty much fell head over heels with this guy. He is just totally in his element, portraying such a big, large and in charge character with such a fine voice, and a voice that definitely put me on the edge of my seat. That is just how powerful his presentation was as an artist. Singing the role of the lawyer Swallow is Stefan Czerny. The thing about Swallow is that he really needs a good basso profondo with great acting chops. With Stefan Czerny, his technique was very Slavic, and that's what I seem to notice about a lot of Slavic singers, especially the bassos. They tend to have a certain type of sound to their voice, which makes them stand out compared to a lot of other singers. It's no surprise that Stefan Czerny has specialized in a lot of the Russian, Czech, and the Slavic repertoire in general. He sung those type of roles very well, which is definitely no surprise for me. And even though he doesn't have that bulk of body that a lot of basso profondos have, the likes of Gottlob Frick and Kurt Böhme and Martti Talvela and Matti Salminen, and even that of Josef Greindl and Karl Ritterbusch, he still is a very fine artist on his own, with such a burnished tone and a round, rich voice with a lot of Slavic undertones. he definitely nailed it in terms of this character. Sure, his tone does sound quite Slavic, but that's quite forgivable because he has excellent acting chops and sung his role very well. Singing the role of Bob Bowles was the great character tenor Andreas Konrad. Now, unlike Peter Grimes, Bob Bowles needs a more lyrical tenor. Think of the likes of comparing Peter Grimes and Bob Bowles to the likes of Eleazar and Leopold, Herodes and Narabot, Belmonte and Pedrillo, Idomeneo and Arbace, Mitridate and Marzio, and Lucio Silla and Aufidio, or basically any roles which requires two tenors to sing in the same opera. With Andreas Konrad, it's no surprise that he's been singing for a very long time. I know this gentleman in the likes of Mime from Rheingold and Siegfried, and a lot of other great character tenor roles. Heck, I even have him as Brighella on a record of Ariadne auf Naxos, conducted by the late Kurt Masur and starred the great Jesse Norman. Now, hearing him as Bob Bowles was a treat on its own. He really sang his part well and acted very well, and he was very great all around. He may not have the lyrical voice of Fritz Wunderlich, but he managed to really portray his character very well with great acting chops and a great involvement to the drama. Singing the role of Reverend Horace Adams is Eric Arman. We also need another character tenor in this role, especially to sing such a thankless role like this. With Eric Arman in this role, he does very well, he sings very well, and acted very well as well. With the role of Ned Keane, we have the American baritone Tobias Greenlaw. The thing about Ned Keane is that, as opposed to Bulstrode, in which he needs a dramatic baritone, with Ned Keane, he needs either a lyric baritone or a more lyrical dramatic baritone. Any baritone who has sung the likes of Papageno, Guglielmo, and at times Mazzetto from Don Giovanni. With Tobias Greenlaw, he had a lot of swagger in his role, yet had some type of youthfulness and type of charm with this role. You could really see that he had a lot of fun, and he really had a ball with this role. I definitely felt enthralled by this gentleman, and he was definitely in his A game for the evening. And then we have the role of John, which was played by Georgi Puchalski, who really played this role really well and managed to give such an involvement to this character, and he was just absolutely good in his portrayal. And then we have the two nieces, sung by Keandra Howarth and Frederike Kampmann. The thing about the two nieces is that you need two bright-toned, light lyric sopranos to really pull off these very thankless characters. Think of the likes of having Pamina and Papagena together, or even that of Susanna and Barbarina, Romilda and Atalanta, Angelica and Dorinda, Ginevra and Delinda, and even, to some extent, Gretel and the Dew Fairy. With these two very fine, light sopranos, namely Keandra Howarth and Frederike Kampmann, both of these young ladies were at their A game, making their characters quite minxish, yet also a lot of fun to see on stage every single time. The conducting done by Maestro Cornelius Meister along with the chorus was excellent all around. Granted, he did start, well, pretty good. It didn't sound totally bombastic, but he definitely had just a lot of fun, and I could really see that shine throughout the evening. So overall, I have to say I was very impressed. The cast of singers was very strong, and the conducting was awesome. And Christoph Loy puts in another very interesting production. I highly recommend that you really check out this opera. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in for my review of Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, which will be aired tomorrow, and even another opera review. So until then, good night, everybody.